Back to the phone lines. We'll talk to Jeff in Oregon. Hi, Jeff.
Hello there. I had a question for you about publicly protesting or fighting against a cause that you feel convicted to fight against, and whether or not those type of actions would be something of God. Specifically, for some reason recently, every time I turn around, I'm being confronted by the subject of abortion.
Uh-huh.
And it's never been something that me or my wife have ever thought of having done. We've never personally had any experience with it. But for some reason, something is moving in me that brings me to tears over the thought of the loss of these children. And recently there's been tons of scripture I've listened to on the radio through many ministries like yours that talk about how these children have a place next to God and they are getting into heaven anyway. So would wanting to fight against something like this be a righteous battle to take up? Would Christ want us to do something like that?
Well, of course. And many years ago, Christian philosopher Francis Schaeffer warned that abortion would be the watershed issue of our era. Of all the subjects relating to the erosion of the sanctity of human life, abortion is the keystone. And his warning, unfortunately, has tragically fallen on deaf ears. And as a result, secularism has won the day. And I think it's important to recognize that there are ramifications to the abortion argument on both sides of the life issue. The origin of life, but also the end of life. And in between there are issues as well, because you have people like Nobel Prize laureate James Watson. And by the way, no insignificant man. He was the co-discoverer of DNA. He says that because of the limitations of present detection methods, most birth defects are not discovered until birth. And then he says this, however, if a child was not declared alive until 3 days after birth, the doctor could allow the child to die if the parent so chose and save a lot of misery and suffering. Seem far-fetched? Perhaps not. We're on a slippery slope. So I think it's important for us to be able to establish, not only scripturally but scientifically, that birth is not the time that a child comes into being. Conception is a time that a child comes into being. It doesn't have a fully developed personality, obviously, but it does have full personhood from the moment of conception. And therefore, the issue that you have underscored is transcendently important. And every life is important to be lived. The notion that, well, if they're going to go to heaven anyway, why not kill them early, is a very bad argument. I read that argument in Rob Bell's book. I was just devastated. I couldn't even imagine that someone that takes the sacred name of Christ upon their lips would use an argument like that in his book, Love Wins. Hardly is a loving argument to make. But biblical ethics is deontological, not consequentialist. An action is right or wrong intrinsically, not on account of the end results. And therefore, it is right to defend life in and of itself. And we should be on the forefront of doing just that. And I think the best way to do that is to really be informed. So you're always ready to give an answer, a reason for the hope that lies within you, with gentleness and with respect. So if you can demonstrate that life begins at conception, for example, then you can counter many arguments from the secularists. Carl Sagan, for example, who suggested that if you abort early, you're aborting a fish as opposed to a fetus. It's a nonsensical argument based on a very flawed scientific premise. But if you know how to counter it, you can use the discrepancy, that which does not correspond to truth, in order to communicate truth.
Thank you very much.
You got it, and I've written about this. There's an appendix in The Face that demonstrates the farce of evolution, which gives you a memorable way of remembering how to counter the arguments of those who feel very led to forward the notion of abortion as being perfectly acceptable in an age of scientific enlightenment. It certainly is not.